Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. This is Alexis. I am a blind self-published author and content creator here on YouTube and in my blog, and quite recently on Substack. I decided to also post my content there, so it's been really interesting. So that is kind of where the places where you can usually find my content. And today we are going to have quite the time. As you can see, this video is very, very long. And from the title, you can also see that we are going to be discussing very well-known romance discourse. The fact that this video is as long as it is shouldn't be strange if you've been here for a while. I am someone who enjoys talking a lot, and I am happy to make long videos. So that shouldn't be necessarily, new. However, the way this video is slightly different in my end because I am breaking up this video into two parts. The first part, which is the longest part of the video, is going to be dedicated to the review of the book Secrets Vegas Style, which is the next book in the Bad Billionaires series. And then the next part of the video is going to be discussing this romance discourse with some things related to writing craft. And I think this is important because I did mention it. I mentioned what this might be about last week, or at least I hinted at it. I did my best to mention it, but essentially that was the case. I think this is important to keep in mind, I think, when reviewing romance, the craft in writing and how you feel about the romance in different ways. I, for one, have a very interesting relationship with, I think, the romance genre in that it is, I have found after a couple of years the type of romance I enjoy reading. There was a point where I did think I didn't quite enjoy it, but also I got pulled into it back again, so I didn't quite understand it. And I started reading adult romance pretty early in my reading journey. Actually, at a time that probably wasn't appropriate, but that is maybe a story for another time. The point being, though, that I have an interesting relationship, and now I have an even more, that was like the reading relationship, but now I have an interesting writing relationship with romance, and I think it is important to discuss certain discourse and certain things that, generally speaking, are related to genre conventions and writing with as much nuance as possible. I'm not going to, try to give you too much here in this intro because I don't want to spoil the rest of the video. If you kind of want to know my opinion on the romance discourse, stick to the end. It's going to be a long review, but I think it's worth looking at and compare and give you your thoughts by the end. Anyway, some housekeeping things though. If you are interested in receiving more videos from me, consider subscribing and turning on notifications. That way you are aware of when I post videos. Also, if you would like to check my writing, you can check out my blog or Substack. I will link them below, if only because while my content on Substack does it does overlap with my blog, you might actually be able, depending on the piece, you might be able to get a early access on Substack because essentially it depends on the piece because my Substack is a bit more curated to fiction. So you might get an early access to those very specific pieces. For example, I already published a flash fiction piece. The newest one I published, not the previous one, but the newest one I published, has yet to be published in my blog. I actually don't know when I'll publish it in my blog, but it has definitely been published on Substack. So if you want to get early access there to some of my flash fiction and maybe even longer short stories, you can subscribe to me on Substack. If you're interested in supporting what I do, you can tip me on Ko-fi. I have that link below. You can also, if you are looking for beta reading services, / critiquing services, email me. I am open to those, and I will and I am happy to make and to talk to you about that. Also, since I am a book reviewer, if you are interested in knowing how I write and comparing my writing based on the things I say here, I guess and stuff, you can support me by buying my books. My debut is a literary fantasy novelette, and I also have a poetry collection out. And I am working on the second book of the series Child of Death, which my debut was the first book in that series. So those are the ways that you can support me. Very much appreciated. Anyway, let's get into this long video, and I will see you on the other side with a lovely discussion. So I hope you're ready for another rant session, because that's what you're going to get from me today. That's what you're going to get from me. But before we do that, hello, welcome back to this channel. I'm a Nexus. I'm a blind author, content creator, and freelancer. I offer reviews here and other content, but am in the process of building my career as an author and seeing if I can figure out freelancing. So if you are interested in any poetry writing services and beta reading, message me on Instagram, linked in the description. Also, if you're interested in my books, you can find them. I will link them below, and you can also find some of my writings in my blog. So make sure to look at that if you're interested. But for now, we have a rant session because I have decided to finally return to the world of Kira Sinclair's Bad Billionaire series. And I have a couple of things I want to address as well before we begin, so that some things are out on the table. So first of all, it looks like I reviewed two specific books out of order. It looks like this is supposed to be book 4. Big Easy Secrets is supposed to be I would assume book 5 or 6. But that did not, I ended up not going that way because I did not realize, because there was no indicator that said so. It's just that I'm on the Goodreads website rather than the app, and when I was getting the description ready to read it, it said book 4, and I was like, oh, okay. So that's a thing. But to me, the order still makes no sense. Kind of like when Overlord went volume 7 being the Invaders of the Great Tomb, volume 8 feels like a slice of life thing, and then volume 9 continues where volume 7 left off. Kind of like that. But it's one of those things. Anywho, so I did review them out of order. It still feels weird, but whatever. I did want to mention that. However, unlike in Overlord, I don't think it matters very much. I mean, even in Overlord, it doesn't matter. But in this case specifically, it doesn't matter what order I review these romances in, because these are standalones, and you can pretty much read them whatever order you want. Because you're following individual pairings and stuff like that. So it doesn't really matter what order you review it in. I just wanted to let you know that I reviewed them in different. I reviewed things out of order, it seems. Because I mean, I reviewed book 1, skipped book 2, and went to book 3 because I did not want to read book 3. Book 2. So it's possible to do this. I really am not missing. Believe me, there's nothing I'm missing, and I don't think there's anything you'll be missing. And the other thing I want to address is that I'm highly upset about this book, and I'm going to bring in a couple of subjects. And some of the things I will be referring to that are touched on in this book include, one of the main things that is included here is domestic violence, and I will briefly touch on that later on in this video. So be aware of that. I want to bring it up because I kind of want to talk about it as a theme in this book specifically. So it does address it, in my opinion, not well, but just because of the way that it's placed in the romance. So I would like to give you that content warning. But without any further ado, let us go for the synopsis and the rant session, and I'll explain why this book irritates me even now, weeks after having read it. I'm still mad. And now even more, actually. Okay. He pretends Vegas excess is all he knows. Will she be the one to reveal the secrets he's hiding? Find out in this fast-paced romance from Kira Sinclair. It is fast-paced and not in a good way. Playing a rogue hides his work as a hero, but one woman sees who he really is. Ugh. Dominic Mercado deliberately cultivates his reputation as a rich womanizing bad boy as a front for secretly helping women in need. But lauded journalist Meredith Forrester's pursuit of a story is about to blow his cover. And for years, Meredith, the woman, I hate those words in there, has blown the Vegas businessman's mind. As his sister's best friend, she's off limits. But now, as the pressure of explosive secrets and unleashed attraction build to their breaking point, will he reveal the truth and risk it all? From Harlequin, a luxurious world of bold encounters and sizzling chemistry. Well, one could argue about chemistry. Love triumphs in these uplifting romances, part of the Bad Billionaires. And then it just has the book list in order. So as you can see, I have complaints even in the synopsis. I went somewhat blind into this book, like I have to these other books as well. Like, I've sort of just gone, like, I briefly read the synopsis and I just didn't, like, look back at it. And it's kind of like that. So it's one of those things. Like, I very briefly read it, but also didn't entirely, like, pay enough attention to it like that. So, as you can see from the title, though, I have lost hope in these romances. But I'm gonna try to structure it better because this is the second time I've recorded this, and the first time I was just mad and upset and incoherent. And I'm gonna do my best to be coherent throughout this video. And if I'm not, I'm sorry. This book makes me angry in ways I just have not. I haven't been in the others like as angry. I feel like I haven't been as angry about the others. I've been mad in some way, but this one just made me upset. This one just took the cake. I haven't it's been weeks since I read it and I'm finally able to record, but it has been weeks and I look at the and I look at this and I'm just like, I'm still mad because of the ending, but also because of some of the something else recently that made me very angry about this book. So I'm gonna start, as I usually do, with the writing portion of this. The prose is good. It's fine. You know, it's accessible. It's easy to read. I actually read it slightly faster than I did the other romances. I'm actually getting better at reading every day. I don't always read every day in Braille, but I'm getting better at it. So I read this slightly faster. This, like many other romances, is you know, it's easy and fast to read. Like if you're looking for a like a really fast read, you can make this work. So the story, as usual, is told in both Meredith and Dominic's point of views. It's third person past, so distant as hell. Makes sense for the genre. This is kind of popular in this type of romance, at least in the ones I have read. And this was published all the way in 2021, so it's not like it's like, you know, 2010 or something. So it's still here. It's still here. Okay. Now I want to say this. Despite everything bad I'm gonna say about this romance, and the fact that I rated it 1 star, despite that, this romance actually had some potential. Like there are areas in this romance that I was just like, yeah, there were these areas, and I'm like, oh, this could have really been great. Like, I found potential, and I would have written it slightly differently in many many ways. There would have been so much that I would have actually removed from this romance just to make it work better. And there were areas of potential here. Um, but again, category romances are basically soap operas. Like, I struggle to I think understand the audience for this, but you know what? I think it's just gonna be the audience is gonna be the type that reads something like I've Got Your Number by Sophie Kinsella and other soap opera like books. That's all I'm gonna say. That's the audience for this. And I'm not the audience. I read these for content, and it's enjoyable to read them for content for me. And that's how I read them. But like, this romance. Okay, there we go. I'm going incoherent for a minute. Okay, now here's the thing. Here's where the potential really was here. The potential really was in one of the themes that I actually really liked in this romance, and it was the theme of image, right? So in the synopsis, you heard that he basically pretends to be a bit of a womanizer in order to cover up his work as a front for being a to help women in need, according to the synopsis. Now, I think there was potential here because she it is pretty much one of the parts that she struggles in the latter half of the story, when she does find out what happened, what he's doing. When she finds out what he's doing, she struggles in that latter half, or in that latter part of the story, to like untangle or disentangle the image that she knows versus the truth. And I think this has a strong conflict right there. Like, that makes for a really really strong conflict. You don't need to add all the drama that was added in here with the domestic violence or whatever. You didn't need to add any of that. You did not need to. There were so many things you did not need to add in this book, including that he was someone who helped people in domestic violence. Like, there's just so much you didn't need to add, because at the end it just all was like smashed together to form something. And it wasn't like in the other romance books. A lot of this stuff just isn't done well. It just isn't done well. At least Big Easy Secrets has a woman willing to use her body as a weapon to get what she wants, and that was fun. This was infuriating. But yeah, there was potential here. Like, the idea of knowing someone your whole life, having not liked them because you saw a couple of things you did not like, but then trying to reconcile the image he showed versus the actual truth. There is potential there, and I like that theme, and I would love an actual romance to explore that. But no, that's not what happened. It's kind of just mentioned, but like also pushed away in there. But there was potential in it. What instead, this romance has a couple of things I kind of want to like. I'll mention throughout, but also I want to talk a little bit about the progression of the writing here. As like, and this is basically specifically pacing. Usually I do pacing later, but we're gonna talk about pacing now, because the thing with pacing is pacing dictates pretty much every part of your story. It dictates the progression of how things happen, the progression of character arcs, the and generally speaking, it's how your story, how fast or slow your story goes. Now, a story can feel fast paced when you read it, but can still be a slow burn. And that's because there are tricks that you can use to make the story feel fast paced while still having a slower pace. So, for example, one of these One of these techniques would be short chapters, even short sentences if you want. Like, these are things that can work. I love short chapters. I'm working on my editing a little bit here and there my romance novella, and I had a bit of longer chapters, but as I'm editing, I'm like, you know what? I can shorten these chapters, and I can make them even shorter, and I can make them really short as I want them. But the point is that they will make for a really fast read, but the events are a little bit slower to some degree. And like, those are things you can use. The way that you put your prose, the way that you the however long you want your chapters to be, do dictate how the reader might view the story and how quickly they might read it, and stuff like that. Now, those are the things. The other thing to note here is that this romance is fast paced, but not in a very good way, because there are moments when it feels slow. So it's not great pacing here. We don't have good pacing here, in my opinion. And part of the reason is that the plot takes too long to happen. I mean, technically, you could argue that the plot starts in chapter 1 because the inciting incident starts in chapter 1. However, not really, because it that part of the plot gets resolved by like chapter 7, and then actually no, chapter 6, I'm pretty sure. Chapter 6, and then by the end of chapter 7, we have an entirely other plot that we didn't even get to see happen on page. We kind of just got news. We kind of got the news, if I remember correctly, at the end of chapter 7. That's my memory of it. Could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm correct about this one, because there wasn't I don't remember there being a point of view. I don't remember there being a point of view where he got the news. I think we were just told about it. So we resolve the part of the plot that could be a huge conflict, and then we enter an entirely different plot a little bit over 50% through the story, and then there is not a huge conflict with the love interest, except whatever the hell they're making up that is miscommunication, because miscommunication, as always, is used in these romances, badly so, but it is. And then we have the black moment, which sucks, and then we have the ending that made me want to bash my head into a wall. So it is not very good pacing. The pacing here feels kind of tossed together. And the other thing too, the other reason I also think this is really bad pacing too, is because of the kind of book this is. This is a category romance. Now, if you're right, category romance, generally speaking, it's short, right? It's really not that long. It's about 200 it's about no more than like 350 pages. 250, 350 pages. That's usually the limit of category romances. They are short. Now, 350 pages might seem long to you as a reader, but it's really not. It's a little over 6 hours in audio. So, but it isn't that long as a writer, because what ends up happening is you have a shorter time, a shorter page count and word count to write. These are less than these are 60,000 words or less. So these are you gotta make each scene, each word count in such a short amount of pages. And I'm sorry to say this, but not all authors are actually good at utilizing their page count and their and generally their words. Now, I'm not saying I'm good or bad. I am saying that based on my reading, based on my thoughts on that. Not all authors are good at utilizing their at utilizing a page count, and they're not all good at writing short. And even if in stuff like that, like there are very talented authors who can make 350 pages work and explore a lot of themes. I would like to here pinpoint you to Olga Dies Dreaming, linked in the description, because that is a perfectly good example. This is not a romance, but it is a perfectly good example of a talented author being able to write a book in about 350 pages and explore very, very, very sensitive themes, as well as, generally speaking, just a lot of themes. There are a lot of themes that she ends up exploring, and she does it in a very short amount of pages, and it is done so well. Like, I was left speechless. That is talent. And not all authors have the skill to do so. And I'm sorry that this the top, there are, it just is. And not all authors have the skill to keep good pacing in that amount of page count either. And the author of Olga Dies Dreaming does it super well. So I recommend you watch that review, or just in general, read the book. Read that book. I know it is not a romance. It is technically, I think, literary fiction, but the amount of skill and care that goes into that writing, incredible. Incredible. And I will forever continue to recommend it, because at the end of the day, it is a book that I think did extremely well. I think it's a book that did things extremely well. And unfortunately, these category romances don't do that. And I suppose there's an argument to be made here about there are a couple of arguments to be made here that I think are valid. However, I would argue that I can't see how they would work here. So a couple of arguments to be made here is, one, not all romances need to have certain conversations, and I agree with that. There are things that I think just don't need to occur, and some of these conversations, for example, when I was reviewing The Kiss Quotient, I mentioned that I saw a review where someone was looking for more exploration on their disability, and I'm like, that's not a necessary thing, because at the end of the day, well, one, it was done like kind of there, but also two, the romance was not about Stella's disability. And that's one of those things you have to, if you're gonna make a romance and you're gonna add specific things, it's my advice is to, if you're gonna add them in a way that make it look like it's gonna be about that, then you need to be able to link it back and explore it well, not just add it and stuff. So that's one of the things. Two, I guess the other valid thing is, well, it's a romance. Yes, it's a romance, but I would argue that it's not just a romance. There are other things happening, and what usually happens is that a lot of romance authors will take a plot, and or like add other plot elements, and then they will sacrifice said plot elements and plot lines to push the romance forward. And a lot of these things are just added to force the leads to spend time together. I understand needing forced proximity, but there are other ways to do it, and not just miscommunication and adding extreme amounts of trauma. I assure you there are other ways to do it. So these are like the main like valid arguments I can see. I suppose you can also say that, not it's not the author's job to have these conversations, and I agree with you, but also the author added these talking points into the book, and the only way it would have worked, I think, is if she would have done it in a way that didn't make it seem as though you wanted to have it, like have it be a huge theme of the story, and that is not what the author did. So yeah, pacing is all over the place due to that. So the first plot, I'm going to tell you the two stories that are in here. In the first plot, that takes about 6 chapters. By the way, we're gonna move into some broad spoilers here. I'm gonna just do that. Okay, the first plot involves Meredith getting some pictures that make it look and okay, wait. There are these women that went missing, and Meredith gets these pictures sent that show that the last place they were at is Dominic's club Excess, and that he was seen with every single one of them, and it is possible that they could be getting trafficked or whatever, and she suspects, and she says, like, do you have something to do with it? Like, literally the beginning of this book, which I like, is that she slaps him. I was very happy with that. But anyway, so so that's kind of that. And he's trying to, and throughout these chapters, there are people trying to convince her not to publish this story because she plans to publish it. She has a story. She's like, I'm going to do my due diligence though first, like figure out that if these things aren't doctored. I want to say that all this stuff happens in about one night. These first 6 chapters happen in about one night, which I'm here for. I think it's interesting, except that it's just too much. But they happen in about a night. And she's even Stone from the first book tries to convince her not to publish that story, even though Dominic is like, yeah, that's not gonna happen. Even though he tells her these women could be in danger if you do that, and stuff like that. But she is shown to be, honestly, by the author, she is giving Meredith a disservice by making her look like not a smart woman, but a dumb little girl, and trying to make Dominic appear intelligent when Dominic is an asshole, and I would rather end his life and steal his money than marry that man. Please note, we're talking about fictional characters here. I'm just gonna say it like this, okay? I would sooner that than that, but like it's just so bad. So that happens. So he ended up deciding, since he can't keep her out of it because she's going to keep looking, because she did go as far as talking to his sister Annalise and is like, hey, can you check these things? And his sister's like, no, I don't believe that he would do such a thing. But both of them end up confronting them. And by the way, another thing that bothered me, here's another writing quirk I got here that bothered me. She had so there's a part where Annalise is like, something like, Dominic, what the hell have you gotten yourself into? And then there's another line that just says she didn't even like give him a greeting. Maybe you rewrite that. Put she didn't even knock on the door. I think it was she didn't bother to knock on the door. Then the dialogue line, not the dialogue line. Then the obvious. That bothered me. I just wanted to mention it. Anywho, so they're confronted, and he successfully convinces his younger sister, to listen to basically, he's like, no, I didn't do anything or whatever to them. Now, granted, this part of the plot does get touched on later on in the story, and it becomes important, but this feels like two different stories, and not like that don't clash well. So that's that, right? That's how this one is gonna go. This is how she convinced him. She leaves. They kiss, I think, for like the first time. In like, this is the first time I think they kissed. I could be wrong, but they did kiss or whatever, and because he hasn't successfully convinced Meredith to drop that story. Um, so since he realizes he's not going to be able to do that, this man basically breaks into her house. And by the time we got here, I I was I was like, great. So we're going back to the Rebels Redemption. Oh my goodness. If you why? Why must we go back? Why? Can we not step forward? Can we not, like, no? We can't? Okay. So he basically breaks her house and tells her what's happening, and tells her why those women disappeared, and she feels bad slightly. They have a one night stand and it's done. He's not awake. He doesn't. She's not there when he's not there when she wakes up. So that's like the first story, and this happens in like 6 chapters, maybe 7. I said 6 chapters, but I could be, yeah, like 6 chapters, maybe 6, maybe 7 chapters. I'm gonna leave it 7 chapters, because then at the end of chapter 7 or 8, we get to our other story. And I want to say that this is 15 chapters long. And by this point, by the time they have sex for the first time and have that one night stand, we're 40 something percent through the book, and maybe reaching 50% of the book. So this is where we're at. The second half of this story, of this nightmare of a book, is we find out that Tessa, one of the latest woman he was helping out, uh, went missing. She made it to one of the locations, but she didn't check in and didn't make it to some of her other locations. Because what we find out in this whole thing is that he helps women along with another company. He helps with Stone Surveillance. He helps women who are going through domestic violence and stuff like that. This is where I was saying I'm gonna approach it at that. And he apparently helps them and gets them new identities and stuff like that. That is why the club is a thing. And in the beginning, we find out she hates, like, Meredith doesn't like excess and the way that he spends his money, and the way that he's basically a womanizer, which is where she has issues with the image. We also found out possibly another reason she definitely would be annoyed at him is, and by the way, I would be annoyed about this too, but basically we get a flashback in this first part of the story to illustrate how much he uh, loved her or whatever, and how he's been in love with her for years. One of the things that we get is this flashback that she went to, so it was the prom night and she was supposed to go, and she was upset and sad, and they started talking, and it was because her date stood her up, and he kissed her, apparently to make her feel better, and she's like, what the hell is wrong with you? Which, you know what, valid question. What the hell is wrong with you? She was talking to you about why she was feeling sad, and your immediate reasoning is to kiss her? So yes, valid question. What is wrong with you? So he decides to put on that mask again and tell her that, because she was complaining. She was like, the friend, that my friends are all kind of having, they have their own days, probably gonna sneak off to do things like have sex in the car or whatever, and do things like that, like typical teenage stuff, or stereotypical teenage stuff, or whatever you want to call it. And he puts on the mask and he's like, I just didn't want you to feel bad. And if you wanted that, technically, that's something I can arrange, basically. And you know what? If he would have said that to me, I would have slapped him. Something's wrong with that man. God damn it. I don't know. I know that this book has been read by at least 27 people, including me, and that there are 7 people who have reviewed it, including me. I did not check reviews for this book, but I now want to know. I want to know. I want to know people's thoughts on this book, because I need to understand. I need to know the people who like them, because this book has like a 3.25 rating on Goodreads, which is not a bad rating. And I want to know. I want to know what the good reviews about this book say, and I want to understand. I want to understand. So that was like in the first half. Now the second half of the story, as I said, Tessa disappears. She didn't make it through her check-ins, and he says that he's gonna go, because he asks her, because he goes to Meredith after her and Annalise are having a girls' afternoon thing or whatever, like, or they're like in the in her apartment or whatever, and he's like, did you mention 21 anything? And she's like, no. And by this time she had already dropped the story. And he's like, why are you asking? I wouldn't reveal that kind of information. Oh, because Tessa's missing, and Tessa is an old friend of theirs. And if I remember correctly, in that first half, he did explain that Tessa was going through the domestic violence. Um, and he's like, she's like, I knew her, like, she didn't come to me or whatever. It's like, yeah, no, she did not come to you. Like, and she felt bad over it, right? And she says, okay, I'm going. And at first he says no. He's like, no, I'm going, right? And she's like, fine, be at this place by like 45 minutes. Otherwise, you're being left. She made it. They go in the plane. They go to Paris, and the whole point is looking for Tessa. But most of these like chapters are spent with them, they and their romance, having, because they have to spend time together, and it's mostly them, quote unquote, getting to know each other, but also just having sex in a while they're looking for Tessa. So it does, like, these two stories do come back together. Turns out the person who sent Meredith those photos and wanted her to publish a story is someone who is the ex-husband of a woman that they helped 2 years earlier, and he wanted revenge, and he's crazy, and he actually kidnaps, and that's true wording, kidnaps and beats Meredith up. Not seriously injured, but still does some damage. And we'll talk about the ending of this later, but put a pin in that. And then the black moment happens, which is the one thing that got me very angry at the end. And yeah, so that's that. So yeah, this pacing is a little all over the place. For me personally, there is too much, and not, like, there's too much and not enough space for it, because this is a category romance, and unfortunately the author does not, in my opinion, have the skill to dedicate time to these themes. So they're not explored well. So yeah, there are themes of domestic violence here, and they just feel like they're added for the drama, as is any kind of trauma. It just seems to be added for the drama of this romance, and it's not done well. Now, these characters, I hate them both. I hate them a lot. Meredith was shallow, and while most of the characterization was given to Dominic, he was an asshole. Especially by the end, and he is an unlikable person. Now, this is where I want to start. I want to have 2 conversations here. Okay, here's the first one. Okay, I understand, right? Okay, I know this. I know and understand that romance is a fantasy, right? I know this. I understand it. But I have I don't understand what the fantasy is in a man like this, based on the couple of things I want to explain in a minute. I don't understand this fantasy. So I want you to keep in mind something here. I want you to keep in mind that romance is a fantasy, and we all have our romantic fantasies, and that not, every romance is not for everyone. I mean, for example, I loved Icebreaker, like that was cute, right? But I know that it's not for everybody, and I know that especially considering how sexually explicit it is. Like, I know it's not for everybody, right? But I want you to keep in mind this. It's not an everyone thing. Like, not every fantasy is going to fit everyone. But there is something about this book, right? And about the fantasy displayed in this book that I don't understand how who whose fantasy it is, whether, like, what fan, because I mean, theoretically it could be the author's fantasy, or it could be a fantasy that they're writing for someone else, or like for the reader, like, not, but I want to understand this, and this is where we're gonna go into the ending part of this. So one of the things in the latter half of the story that we talk about is what happened to Dominic and why he is extremely bothered by a lot, like, and why he ended up in this job. And the reason he did it is because his own mother's went through domestic violence. All right. And when we find out, again, trigger warning here, she went through it with his stepdad, and he and his sister witnessed her murder, her death. The guy hit her eventually too hard enough to kill her, and he told them, and he made it look like she fell down the stairs. And the kids were not believed, and they were told the truth because the person there that interrogating was a friend of that man's. So the guy was never punished, and his whole thing was to help these women. Okay, so I so that's kind of where that is, and this is also, again, when she kind of changes her mind about him, uh, and starts telling him that he's like, he's kind of a good guy, right? Because in the first half, when she finds out, she feels bad because she's been judging him the entire time. Valid. But she has a hard time for a while reconciling the image of him, and of, like, the real him and the womanizer him. Again, valid. Potential for good conflict. Then she hears a story. I do want to say, I think, if I remember correctly, after hearing this story, they do have sex, which I think is just like, okay, do you, people? I can't. Okay, it irritates me. But she's been telling him, starting since the former half, when she finds out everything, even though she is having a hard time reconciling the truth with the lie, that he's a good guy, even though he's blaming himself over, I think, Tessa or whatever, and other things. And after this, she really does push him to, like, yeah, you're a good guy. You're the hero. Like, yeah, like, because he tried to save his mom that day, but she got, because he got in front of her and stuff like that, before, when the guy was about to hit her, but she managed to, because he wanted to stand up to the guy, but she eventually took the hit, and he, like, because of course her child, and he blames himself for not saving her, which is why he is doing what he's doing. He's like, no, you're the hero that night. You did well. Like, you are the hero. And for a while, it seems like they've done they're okay together. Now, I do want to say this feels like a valid trauma response, but I, again, do not think it was done justice in this book. Like, if you were going to do something, it just doesn't feel like this book did it well. Like, a really good book that had, I think, trauma in it, it didn't, like, it went through it a little bit, and it actually explored it, I think, amazingly well, was The Long Game by Elena Armas. And she had like both of these characters went through shit with like for different reasons, and it was traumatic to them, but and it was explored. And do you know what we find out in the epilogue of that book? That both characters went to therapy. We don't get that here. No. What we get instead is that they everything seems well at the time until he's able to eventually find Tessa, and he goes to see her, and he leaves Meredith alone, and she gets kidnapped and stuff like that, and then they're looking for her. Eventually, she's found to be like, she manages to get out from where she is. She's like in this other room or whatever, and she is injured, and she's interrogated, and she's beaten by this guy who makes things, kind of like, he wanted to get vengeance on. She wanted to get revenge because of everything, of his wife leaving him, and he got mad that Meredith did not publish the story he wanted, so she got hurt. Now, this is what leads to the black moment, because what ends up happening is, and like I said broad spoilers before. I should have just said spoilers because I can't. Anyway, what ends up happening here is, when she's hurt like this, when she is in need of comfort, maybe a little reassurance, maybe like, hey, I'm here, would you like something, do you need anything, would you like some food, some water, anything, he becomes cold to her. He turns cold to her. Now, it could be argued, I guess, that it was from a response, but also, I don't care. By this point, I don't care. Because she is reaching out to this man. She is reaching out to him for comfort throughout everything. For like the next 24 hours of time. Because they have to eventually fly back, and they end up flying together, but he sits away from her and says he has work or whatever, so he avoids her. While this woman is her reaching out for comfort, trying to get reassurance, and his asshole becomes cold to her. By this point, I was just like, I was furious. But then, like, I was angry, furious. Yes, I was furious. But then comes the time when, she and Tessa say goodbye, and they're like, hey, if you're never in a place, you can get in touch. Yeah, get in touch. Great. And then when he's like, okay, I have your, he tells her that her driver is going to take her home or whatever. And he's like, oh, we're not going together. She's like, no. Like, and he's like, and he puts on the mask again of the womanizer. Like, you know what it was? I always wanted to see how good you were in bed, and I had that chance. And she rightfully gets angry, and I rightfully am outraged. Oh my goodness. I at this point am outraged. I'm outraged, but somehow the rage is more when we reach the fucking last chapter. Because and it just continues to build. Like, I hated him from the beginning. From like the first chapter, I did not like him. I barely liked Meredith from the first chapter, but I didn't like her either, because she was a shallow character. Like, the author dedicated no time to fleshing her out and giving her a character arc. Like, there was nothing. No. It was all safe for this asshole. I hate him. I wanted him to die. Okay, I know I'm furious. I know. Now, she's like, she decides, I can't go home right now. So she decides to visit her best friend, which makes sense and stuff. And eventually someone actually reports this to Dominic, which sure, I guess, like they're like, yeah, the driver said she didn't go home, that she went to Anna's apartment or whatever. It's like, yeah, it kind of makes sense that she would do it, right? Okay. Oh, we also get a somewhat of a plot line here, another plot line which we'll talk about, but it's supposed to be leading to another to it's supposed to be for like the next romance that I'm supposed to be reading, but I'm currently reading a somewhat better romance, so I'm so happy about it. Well, it's supposed to be better. I have some complaints about this one too, but it is slightly better. Like this one, the one I'm reading, I feel like I will give 3 stars to. So, anywho, I so the thing is, there we go. Right, she goes to her best friend, and what I hate this so much because Annalise sort of validates her feelings, kind of like she barely, but I guess you can argue that she kind of validates her friend's feelings, but barely. But she says, "Oh, but you know you love him," and but what she does is like he you know that night like he went through a lot. He's not doing well, so and basically convinces her to go after him rather than validating her friend's feelings and saying, "My brother did something stupid, and you deserve better," as any good friend should say, in my opinion. Like I was angry. Annalise, you're not a good best friend. No, you're not a good best friend. I would sooner get advice from Alexa than have a friend like that. I cannot. I cannot. So she does. She is the one to go after him. She does tell him that she loves him. And even when he tries to push her away, she does say that she loves him. They even kiss and everything. Like she tells him that she loves him, like or whatever. And she's the one that bursts into his office or whatever. And eventually they end up together. And there's an epilogue that doesn't really matter, but we'll maybe talk about it later. I don't know. And that's the end of this book basically, because the epilogue doesn't matter. We find out that they're engaged. That's like the big thing. It takes place months later and they're engaged. The epilogue is their engagement party, and I'm furious. By this point, like I hated them. I hated them. Now, this is the other conversation. Okay, so recently I was watching a video by LadyGenevia, and I will link the channel below. I really like her. I mainly was watching for Bridgerton coverage, even though I have not watched season 3, part 1 of Bridgerton, and I don't plan to watch that until the second part comes out in June, because I hate this part 1, part 2 model, particularly because I have to wait a month, and I'm not willing to do that, and I prefer binging, or I prefer either binging or watching like a couple episodes a week. I don't want like here's 4 episodes and then here 4 more episodes, and the next month I would be more happy with like either the way that they release a circle or just go 1 episode at a time, like just 1 episode each week. Those are the ones I prefer, but I do not like part 1, part 2. It irritates me. But I was watching it, and one of the things that in one of the videos that she made, she's talking about a scene in Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, which, by the way, expect a review for that soon, because season 3 is out and it is a Penelope and Colin season. And I am so yeah, I'm gonna be Bridgerton out of order on purpose, because we're following the timeline of the show, not the timeline of the books. So expect a review for that eventually. But basically, in the scene what she's talking about, Colin is complaining to Penelope over not having a purpose, and she, in the book, which I feel I'm gonna enjoy this one part, she rightfully says like, "Oh yeah, you don't have a purpose. You who are a privileged man who is able to do whatever the hell he wants. Like, try being a spinster and being in my shoes for once as a woman." And she like rightfully leaves. Like, stop complaining to me about it. And it got me to thinking. about this. And this is where the fantasy aspect of this comes back. Because I genuinely want to understand this. And the only way I understand this is the worst way possible. In these romances, in these specific category romances that I'm reading, the women particularly do a lot of emotional labor for the men in these romances. Like a lot of emotional labor. Like an extreme amount. An amount that to me feels exhausting and even inappropriate. That's the kind of that's the kind of emotional labor that you should be doing. And they often, really most times, have little to no agency. Pretty much all the time, just have like little to like no agency. I will say, in at least in Naima Simone's romances that I have read, the women have agency, and I like them. I mean, I didn't like. I did not like. I think her name is Eve. I did not like Eve in The Perfect Fake Date, but I liked the woman in Black Sheep Bargain. I think she is great. I liked I liked Micah in Secrets of a One Night Stand, even though I hated the pregnancy part of it. And I liked the woman in whose name I forgot in the first romance, Vows in Name Only. Okay, I liked them. I can at least say they have agency and they don't take shit from these men. And I can also say that they are strong, empowered women and don't need these men at all, and pretty much go with it. Like they're just like, I find value in myself. You, sure, I like you, but I'll be fine without you, is the vibe I get from them. But in romances, in these romances that I've been reading by Kira Sinclair, I don't get those vibes. I get the vibes of women who barely have any agency and just get dragged into shit. And in the process, they get to know this traumatized man, and they do a bunch of emotional labor to boost their egos. And then in the end, for what? To end up with them? The way I see it is they end up with them, and then the cycle gets repeated all over again. I mean, you can also argue that in fantasy romance, this is a thing. Like the man is usually heavily traumatized and do all this stuff, and the women can empathize. But most of the time, in the ones I read, specifically in the ones I read, most of the time, they're both traumatized and are doing emotional labor for each other and intend to support each other. In the ones I read specifically, and in my favorites, the ones that I read, they're usually traumatized and end up doing emotional labor for each other and give each other emotional support. Even with all the stuff that happens, even with the miscommunication that can come about and all that stuff. Those are the ones I'm familiar with. I have not seen one that's like this terrible, right? So, or the fantasy is that the man does more emotional labor and boosts her up, which is usually one I will admit I like a little bit more. But I want to understand the fantasy. What does a woman gain from doing all this emotional labor to be with someone like Dominic, who in my opinion would be the one I would easily break up with and be like, I am not your therapist. Like, find someone else. After that ending where it was just like, he became cold to her knowing that she got kidnapped and stuff like that. Like, I would be done. Like, she was reaching out for comfort. I actually felt bad in this area. Like, I didn't like Meredith in general, but like when I was here, I felt bad. I was just like, oh, that's so bad. Like, you couldn't reciprocate anything. You couldn't reciprocate an emotion. Nothing. This is where I literally would have been that person that would have been terrible and said, fuck your trauma. I don't care about your trauma by the end of this. I do not. Like, this character specifically, I can't. When I was there at the end of at that part of the book, I was like, I don't care about your trauma. She was asking for help, and you did nothing. Meanwhile, in this entire book, for the most part, she's been doing a lot of emotional labor trying to boost you up and trying to she's like the one person that's actually showing emotion and being there, doing that labor for you, labor that you should have been doing. And you just like ice her out. I was upset. I'm still upset. But I want to know though, this emotional labor. What do you gain from it? As if you were a woman reading this, like what do you gain from it? Like, all it tells me is, like, well, the way I look at this fantasy is, it's basically like a facet of the I can fix him fantasy, where it's like, I will do all this. He's nice to me, so I can fix him. I can do all this. I will do all this emotional labor, even if I am drained. I have fixed him, and I'm drained, but I fixed him. But all that this tells me is, you're gonna have to drain yourself again to, quote unquote, to, I guess, refix him. Because at the end of the day, if he did this once, if his emotions are this erratic, if he did not take any therapy, if he did not even bother, like, actually dealing with his shit, he's never going to do it. And he's never going to be an emotionally intelligent partner to you. And even if he learns after he leaves you, at the very least, he maybe did the work, but that's not what this is. And I'm not someone who looks for messages in a book and any kind of messaging, because I don't think that's fair. But if you're as an author looking to send a particular message, I mean, I think you should at least be aware of the message you're sending. I don't think you need to necessarily make your story about having a message, but if you're looking to send a message to, if your intention is to send a message to your audience, the message that you're sending to these women is, my emotions don't matter, but theirs do. I can help them. I can fix this kind of person. I've heard, and granted, I don't, again, theoretically, the people that are reading this are adults and should know better. So I don't care too much about the message that's being sent. But I do want to let you know that if, as a writer, if your intention is, I am going to write a story and this is the kind of message that I want to deliver, and you do want to be aware of how that might be taken, and you want to be aware of the kind of message you're delivering, if this is your if this is what you want, if you want to deliver a message, this is one of those things to keep in mind. Because when I read this, if I was looking for a message, if I was like maybe impressionable or whatever, and I was looking for a message, this is the kind of message that I would get. And I don't understand the fantasy. That's what I want to know. Because again, romance is a fantasy. You get to live through these books a bunch of different fantasies safely, of course. And it, like, romance is a safe way to live out any fantasies that you don't want to act out in real life. Even dark romance fits into that. But in this case, what's the fantasy? Like, what? I don't understand this fantasy. What do you get out of this? What do you get out of this in general? And as a writer, I also don't understand it, because the author is putting in all these themes of domestic violence and trying to make them the hero by helping women who are going through domestic violence escape their husbands, but she doesn't do the work to explore these themes. And when I read them, it's getting exhausting, because I think that this is gross. I think it's gross that someone is putting certain themes in their books and making them plot points, but don't give them the space. And I don't necessarily think that everything needs to have a conversation, but I think that there is a space for everything, and I think that category romance, uh, for the most part, not the ones that I have read, not every author I have read has the skill to take a sensitive subject and explore it well. And in my opinion, I think that is a sign not to write these themes in. So now that we're ending on a bit of a of a note, of a bad note here, let's also talk about um, unnecessary epilogues, unnecessary parts. Because the epilogue was unnecessary. It was in the point of view of Annalise at the engagement party, and there's a plot line that kind of sort of gets touched, like almost not touched on, but like kind of touched on earlier, where it seems like she's having someone steal her money in her casino, and that kind of plot line comes back in the epilogue, and she meets the person that she asked her brother to hire a consultant for her, and she meets that person, and she doesn't necessarily like him for something that happened a few years ago. I forgot what it was. It wasn't that important. But he turns out to be the consultant and her love interest for her book. Basically, this was unnecessary. You could have just left it at the other idiots getting together. You would have been fine. So, yeah, those are just my notes about this book. I am angry, glad I got to scream, but also I think that the addition of these themes was insensitive, and it feels gross when the author adds them for nothing more than drama. So, those are my thoughts on that. If you have any comments, especially if you've read the book, let me know. What do you think about it? Good or bad? What are your thoughts? What do you think what do you think about it? I I don't want to end this in a bad note though, so I'm gonna end this in a happy note by telling you this. First of all, I did rate this 1 star. I rated it 1 star. This is a bad book. But I'm gonna end it on a happy note and tell you how I would have rewritten this book somehow. Um, and tell you where I would go with it. I would try to keep it short. First of all, I would try to keep it in the category romance range, but I would take away a lot of things. So first of all, I would make this a bit of like a journey book, where it would have been very much character focused rather than plot focused. It would have absolutely been more character focused. And the way I would have written it, first of all, I would take away his job as a I would say I would take away his job as a like helping women with domestic violence. I and everything related to domestic violence, I would take that away. All of it. I would just remove it. I would also take away that kiss in the flashback, because I think that was stupid. Unless actually there are ways to utilize it, but take away the kiss. But there's a way to utilize that flashback and do it well. I think, to some degree, there's a way to do it well. I think so. I would rewrite this in a couple different ways. I'm not sure what the conflict would be that would have her going to his club, but maybe actually we can make this easy. So maybe he is someone who has that image of being a bit of a womanizer, but it's not a front for anything. He just happens to be someone who is known because he's rich, so he's just known in the news to be someone who hangs with a lot of women, and he doesn't have a relationship. He's just like a bit of a player, maybe, or something. And maybe make Meredith somewhat annoyed, because to her, from the outside, as an outsider, it looks like like he just uses them. Or the other option, instead of a womanizer, what we could do is maybe have her not care that he's entirely sleeping with a bunch of of women, as in it's gonna be like, yep, you, instead of like not having like having her more like, yeah, like more sex positive and just like, yeah, you're sleeping with a lot of women, whatever, but also jealous because she's like, I like him, and you know he's done all of this, right? So I can't, like, the bigger conflict is I don't think I can trust that because he's sleeping with a lot of women, and bring it back to that, like that flashback, and we're gonna change the flashback to say that it was prom night. She got upset that she had no date, so instead of making him an asshole, we're gonna say he's like, hey, maybe, I mean, if you want, I don't have any plans tonight. I could be your date if you want. I don't mind taking you and stuff like that, and being your date, like as a friend or whatever, if you want. And maybe have her agree, like, oh, that's great. Like, not have such a fraught relationship. She just had like a, maybe like a distant relationship with him from the beginning. Like it was not like bad, like I hate you, but it also wasn't like great. So it was just in the middle. Like he just existed as her sister, as her best friend's brother. That's all he was, the best friend's brother. He was not that important in her life. But he's like, oh yeah, sure. Oh, but she developed a crush on him for different reasons. Maybe have him do random things for her, like in the as teenagers, right? And that when he offers her the chance to not, not feel bad, like he'll take her out, he'll take her to prom, he'll take the place of her date basically, and maybe he shows her a really wonderful night. He dances with her, he shows her a lot of appreciation. Maybe the stuff that she didn't like, he gives her a really really good night, and stuff like that. And after that, maybe she tries to like, maybe the bigger part of the thing is that she tries to they talk or whatever, and she tries to approach him, and she tries to, maybe she actually reveals her feelings to him at some point, and he says no. He rejects her. We can make it a misunderstanding, or we can just make it that he just rejected her for whatever reason. He just rejects her. Um, and then years pass since that, and he's done all this stuff, but something happens that would bring them closer. We can even make it a mystery aspect, but instead of someone disappearing, she's a journalist, so she, maybe he wants her to we can even make it really really easy and just have it so that, like, she she she's asked to, like, he wants her to either write a story, or she's asked to write a story over the fact that he is making some kind of change, and maybe like he's closing the club for a while, and they want to know why, but there's really very little to that story. It's just that he wants to take a break or something, so he's closing it for now, or he's just closing a location and people want to know what happened. And obviously we can have like a flippant response that just says like, it's not bringing in enough for what it is or whatever. So we can make the club either we close it, or we make it a bigger part of the plot, that like something is something's happening in there, and she's supposed to do some kind of feature story on the club. Some kind of event maybe is happening, and she's going to do some kind of feature story. There we go. That's better. Some event is happening. Maybe not the closing, but some event is happening at the club, and she's supposed to do a feature story, which forces her to spend time with him. Forced proximity comes in a little bit more naturally now. And we don't have all the trauma. I love it. So she is forced to spend some time with him, and at first she just decides, I'm gonna keep a work relationship and just ask him the questions and take the pictures and do all this stuff, and I'll be at the event or whatever. And in that time she brings they talk, they start kind of like because they don't their relationship went back to when they were teenagers. They were a bit more distant. It's just polite. So now that they're stuck together, though, they start spending since they start spending time together, they start kind of getting to know each other again as adults and stuff like that. And though he liked her, he starts falling in love with her again. And they start getting to know each other as adults and stuff like that. And at some point, maybe she gets to see that the image he's presenting is not entirely, he like the image that the media shows is that he is a womanizer. And maybe at some point she started believing it, even if she doesn't care how many women he sleeps with because she's jealous. um but you get two different images because she doesn't spend time with him. And she's like, she doesn't know if these women are just being used or something, even though he never did anything to her, he never used her, he gave her a good night, he just rejected her. But he's sleeping with these women, even though the media is still presenting it as womanizing or as something along those lines. She just kind of stays away from it, but she starts seeing him again as the nice guy that gave her that date that she really wanted because she was feeling kind of insecure that night. And she sees that nice guy again, but she's having a hard time maybe reconciling that image with an image of the person that rejected her and probably found her lacking, unlike the other women he's been with throughout the years. And there's the conflict, and that is the conflict that they have to resolve. There is some miscommunication maybe because she doesn't understand what's happening, and maybe her there's another reason we can make something happen that would bring her other that would make the insecurities a thing. Maybe because I mean, bullying is a thing, and teasing, and people, you can always find someone lacking for a reason, for whatever reasons. But we can explore all of that, and then they end up together eventually. But that's kind of how I would have written it. I would have just tried. I would have focused a lot. I would have honed in on that whole reconciling one image with the other, and I would have made it on personal insecurities, just because it gives her more agency and it gives her more of an arc of someone who because we want to also give them each an character arc. She, for example, has to work on herself. He just happens to be an addition to it, but she has to work on herself and stuff like that. He maybe there was a reason maybe that he rejected her that I wouldn't know. I don't know the reason that would be. Like, maybe there was a reason he would have rejected her, good or bad, it doesn't matter, but he still rejected her. And that's something to do that. So that is how I would have rewritten it. How would you have rewritten the mess that is this book? Let me know in the comment section. This is my review. 1 star. Hate this book. And I can't wait to read read some good romances for you. I truly cannot wait to read romances that I love and that I get to review, or at least like. So yeah. Anyway, cue future me with her outro or their outro, and explain anything else that I might forget to say. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this review and that you are ready to continue the discussion, specifically on my favorite discourse online, which is, does romance actually lead a happily ever after? I think it's a very interesting discourse, and I want to discuss that today with you. Before I do that, I do want to say 2 things. One, my apologies for giving you this video kind of late, or at least later than planned. I've been very busy in a new position, and I just haven't had much time to edit this and record this last part. And 2, I really heard myself struggling trying to rewrite this, to tell you how I would rewrite this story. And I think part of it is the fact that I do think that Big Easy Secrets actually had a bit more potential for me to rewrite. This one was a bit all over the place, and I think I struggled. I couldn't tell you if this was actually the reason. This is the reason I think it is, now watching it in the future. Anywho, let's talk about this discourse. And I think the best way to start is to tell you where I'm coming from, both as a reader and as a writer. So I began writing when I was between the ages of 10 or 12. I can't quite remember which one was the right time, because I don't remember the exact time, but I do remember that I began writing specifically Dragon Ball fanfiction. And I specifically began writing fanfiction before I knew what fanfiction was. I found out about fanfiction when I was 18, and I read a Dragon Ball meets Aladdin type fanfiction for the first time, and it was called Thrill of the Chase, and it was a really good story, actually. If it was a novel, if someone like actually like changed the names and changed it up and republished it as a novel, like if the author, not someone, but if the author who originally wrote it ended up like, you know, changing the names and republished it as a novel, I would absolutely be reading it, because it was actually very, very good. It was like, I think it was about 40 chapters, and it was great. I actually really enjoyed it, and I wish I would have known as a kid about the world of fan fiction, because I read it. I don't read fan fiction anymore, but I think I actually kind of want to get back into it, because it was really good to read fan fiction of a show I really enjoyed. And you can pretty much find fan fiction about anything. So I would have loved to kind of know that in my teens. I would have been really interesting. That said, I read as a kid, and, you know, stories were read to me, but I began like willingly reading a bit more when I was 13, when I had access to Bookshare. And this will be important later, but so put a pin on the whole access to Bookshare thing. It'll be important in a second, or a little bit later when I explain this. I began studying the craft of writing when I was 14. At 14, is kind of, well, actually, no, I was 13 when I began. Never mind. I began studying the craft of writing when I was technically 13, about to turn 14. And around that time, that was when I went to high school for writing. So I was privileged enough to attend a performing arts high school, and we had majors. Mine was communication arts, aka writing. And I was able to study 4 years of writing. When I was 14, I did begin studying craft books. That's when I started kind of reading some craft books. I think it was a bit more on and off like I do now, but I did begin kind of reading it. And the first thing I read was Gail Carson Levine's book, Writing Magic, Creating Stories That Fly. She was, at the time, I kind of went between YA books from like early 2000s, specifically the Blue High series, and fairy tales, specifically Gail Carson Levine's fairy tales. And those kind of what I read. And I realized she had a writing book, and I said, oh, okay, I'll read it. And it was, at the time, it was great. It was a really interesting book, and I would love to reread it again. I actually have it on a list of things to reread. But that was like my first craft book, and that's how I've been. In high school, I had 2 years of creative writing and 2 years of journalism, though the fourth one was specifically for yearbook writing, but, you know, that's kind of what it was. And in my years of creative writing, I studied different forms of writing. And that is one of the things I am very grateful for, and something I kind of continued in college a little bit when I transferred from community college to university. Around this time, again, I was reading multiple books at the time. I think it was when I was about 15 or 16, because definitely it was a bit after I finished the Harry Potter series, which was my sophomore year. So it was a little bit after that I ended up deciding to dive in. I remember myself I remember browsing Bookshare, and at some point finding a book. It was a romance book that was really interesting to me at the time. And that was my, I wouldn't say it was the first time necessarily I read like an adult book, but it was also, I would say it was the first time I picked up a romance book that I knew was an adult book and would be an adult book based on the description. And I downloaded it, and I knew I shouldn't be reading it because of my age, but I did it anyway. And that was like my very first foray into adult romance and into romance generally, I would say. I think I did read other maybe YA romances, but I can't be sure if I would classify them more like just YA fiction, but with like romance subplots, because I haven't reread those books. So I can't be sure, but they definitely had some romance from time to time. But the first time I picked up a romance book was definitely it was this book. It was a book where two characters had a BDSM relationship, specifically at first. They had a dominant / submissive relationship. And the book was called The Submissive by, I think her name is Tara Sue Me. And it was interesting. It was really interesting book. Again, I know I shouldn't be reading it, but I read it anyway. And that was like my first foray. And at the time, I was having extreme amounts of sleep problems. I would say my sleep problems were horrible. They're bad now, but they're getting slightly better now that they're getting treated to some degree. They're getting a little bit better, but at the time it was horrible, and I spent a lot of late nights reading books, and a lot of those books were adult romances, most of which were actually category romances, like the one I reviewed today, and like the ones in the Bad Billionaires series and in the Billionaires of Boston series, stuff like that. So a lot of them were in that kind of in that area. I didn't find my brand of romance that I liked until I think it was maybe 2020, because lockdown was a good time for all of us in a way. It was a great time. I'm being sarcastic, by the way. It was an interesting year for me. That was the year I actually fully read Twilight and realized my 14-year-old self was right to DNF after chapter 5. And it was also the year before I found Throne of Glass. So I knew that was when I kind of discovered romantasy, and I'm like, okay, I like this. And this is great. And then I was around 2020, I think, that I also read Casey McQuiston's, what is that called? Their first book, Red, White, and Royal Blue. And then I've read other books like that in contemporary romance, and that's kind of like my brand of romance, and so on and so forth. However, before this, I was having a difficult time, because a lot of the romances I read that were very similar to what I reviewed today were kind of disappointing, because I felt like the women had no agency, and I was reading other young adult books at the time as well, besides these adult books where women had a bit more agency, or the characters had a bit more agency, and I felt they didn't, and it was very disappointing. And I was like, they shouldn't have ended up together. There shouldn't be a happily ever after here. And for a time, I did believe that yes, that romance didn't need happily ever after, and that it still should be considered a romance. I did have that belief, and it was a lot of disillusionment that I had toward romance. And I think, and the interesting thing is, I wanted to move away from romance, and I did my best to move away from romance, but I was always pulled back into it. There was something that even when the book was not great, that always held my attention toward romance. And I think I know what that is, and I think what that is the fact that I liked it. Even there was something about romance that's just awesome, and I liked it, and I read it very much shamelessly, even when I have to read bad books like this sometimes. And I don't actually have to read category romance, but they're fun to read and review. But the point being, though, is that I understand that I was into romance at the time, but I didn't like what I was reading, and it was very disappointing. And I think what was really interesting when I started reading romance is, again, like I said earlier, I had access to Bookshare. Bookshare is, if you're unaware, and hey, if you're interested in making a donation to a nonprofit, I would suggest this one. Bookshare is an online library that makes books accessible for people with reading barriers. And it gives them in different formats. So that's like the basic form. I would definitely, it is bookshare.org. I will link it in the description. I would definitely if I have to make a donation to anything, I would make it to this. And it's a great cause. I love them. I donated monetarily once, but every time I write books, I send them a copy. And my books are all there. So I usually donate my content to Bookshare. And that is something I had access to 24 hours a day at any time I was awake. And this is important because I also didn't actually have parental controls in the computer. I had a school laptop, and technically if I was logged into the what is that called? To the school email that they gave us at some point, I did have some restrictions, specifically on YouTube, and that was perfectly fine. But Bookshare, I think, was still accessible. Also, though, if I logged into my email, I had no actual parental controls. So I had no parental controls on my computer. I could read whatever I wanted at that time. So no one really knew what I was and wasn't reading. And I could also get away with reading romance, specifically adult romance, very steamy adult romance, I should say, very spicy romance in school, because I had I had a Braille display. Specifically at the time I had the Braille Note Apex. And I remember I have a memory of being in the library once, and I was reading. I was not reading The Submissive. I was reading some other book of this author. And I was not reading A Spicy Scene, but it was obviously like kind of leading up to eventually, maybe in a couple of chapters, there being a spicy scene and stuff. And I was reading this, sitting in the library. I was reading this. I usually always had my speech off, so I was reading in Braille and everything. And someone asked me, "Hey, what are you reading?" And because this is what I had read a couple months earlier, I said, "I'm reading Harry Potter." I don't remember if I said an exact book name, but I said I was reading Harry Potter, and they just believed me. I knew I could get away with it because no one would be able to confirm that I wasn't reading it. No one, there's no screen. There was no screen on the Apex. There was nothing like that. And I have a feeling that even if there was, since it was a Braille ready format type of file, I don't think they would know the difference because it would be in Braille dots anyway. So there was no one to disprove what I was saying. And I knew I could get away with it, and I did it, and I took advantage of it, and I was fine with it. So yeah, sometimes I would read adult romance in school, and I definitely read it mostly when I was awake late into the night. Around this time, I was, still also studying writing and everything. And when I went to college, I did not study writing during community college. I was still writing in my free time, but it was a bit of a struggle because I couldn't complete any manuscripts and stuff. But eventually, when I transferred to university, I was writing a little bit more, but also I decided I was going to do an English major with a concentration in creative writing and in Spanish. But for our purposes, the English major is the one that kind of counts as in creative writing. I did take one creative writing course in Spanish. It was like a workshop thing, so it was kind of interesting. But most of my creative writing courses, which were 6 of them that I took in school, were all in English. Anywho, so this concentration had so that I would take 4 classes in creative writing. I took 2 more for different reasons. One of them was an elective, and another was I decided to try it because I really needed it to take it, and turns out it was covered, and I was okay with it. It was fun. So I took these creative writing courses in college, and like in high school, I took different types of creative writing. I didn't just stick to one very specific thing that I wanted to learn. So I took different forms of creative writing, I wouldn't say disciplines, but definitely different forms of creative writing. And again, very grateful for that. And now, and one of the classes I took was actually Foundations of Romance, where I learned about the romance conventions, which are specifically meet cute and happily ever after / happy for now. And I kind of understood it. And then I went into the train of, yes, romance always needs a happily ever after, and so on and so forth. But then I read books like this, right? And it makes me rethink my position. So, in one of my courses that I took, Intro to Fiction, I realized that a lot of what I write is in the literary fiction genre. Specifically, I write literary fantasy. So that kind of made me rethink a little bit about it, especially because in Foundations of Romance, I wrote a romance story. It was a novelette. Which I am currently re-editing because I decided to change the ending, and I needed to, and it went through so many versions. I went back to the first one for the most part and decided to change the ending a little bit, and I'm still kind of developmentally editing that. Anywho, point being though, I wrote this, and I was kind of thinking about it, and I decided one day to search up something on Google, which is the basis of my argument at the moment. And I'll tell you what I searched up in a little bit. So that is kind of where I'm coming from in this. I've been a reader for, I guess, you can say several years. I've read romance for several years. But I'm also an author. currently self-published, and also working on the next book I need to self-publish. But it is the fact that I am an author. I've been studying the craft for so I would say since I was like 13 when I began studying the craft. I've been studying the craft for a little over a decade now. 13 years. Damn, how the time flies a little bit. Well, not flies, but like how the time feels interesting now. So I have been studying the craft. I've been writing since I was 10 or 12, but I've been studying the craft for a little over a decade now. And I think that looking at this from both a reader and writer point of view is interesting to me. And I'm hoping that I can add some nuance to a conversation that usually feels very black and white, both because of some authors and readers. And I think it's important to look at things in all ways. And one of the things that kind of brings up the conversation that I thought about was the little bit of research I did, and as well as the freedom that it gave me in a way. So one of the more interesting things about this argument is the technique that, based on the research I did, and my opinion, both sides are right. Romance both does and doesn't need a happily ever after. It's really dependent on, I think, how we look at it. And for that, I'm going to establish some things. And one of them is this. Technically, writing has no rules. There are no rules in writing. There's no right way to write. There are genre conventions, but let us be honest, that can change at any point in time because readers change. There's a reason why we don't use head hopping anymore. And that is because it's no longer popular. Supposedly it confuses the readers. I don't know. I never felt very confused when I read a book from when I read something like, let's say, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where there is a lot of head hopping. I've never felt confused. I don't understand, but okay. I generally write in that kind of indirect discourse, or what is that called? Third person omniscient, where I can just shift point of views whenever I like. But most of the time, if you're writing in third person, there is usually you stick to one character, sometimes two. It's very dependent. You don't always switch, and it depends on the book. But it's most of them, it's limited, right? But I do not usually stick to that specific rule. So I don't think there's a perfect way to write, and I think that while there are genre conventions, they can change. Right now, the ones genres are the way I view them. The way I view genres right now is that they're there to help us, kind of like tropes, market our books and place them in, and also just place them at the stores, as do categories. Categories are the same, to place them in a store so that readers can find the things that they're looking for. And for writers, this also makes it easier because, we can market, hey, I wrote an enemies to lovers, a romance, right? And some people will not look at the plot, at the synopsis. They'll be like, oh, you said it's enemies to lovers. Okay, I'm going to pick it up. So it makes it doable and stuff like that. And each genre has their conventions and tropes. Fantasy, for example, has things like the chosen one. Sometimes there's a prophecy. It's very dependent on the genre. When I look at genres, I think of them as both, as a blessing, as a blessing because you can make it easier to categorize, I guess. But when I look at the conventions, I see those as blessings, and as a blessing and a curse. See, the problem that I find with conventions sometimes is that they can be, it makes it very easy for us for things to become very rigid and very formulaic. I have no problem with formulaic writing. Not at all. Not even if it's predictable. I don't care. There is a reason I love Dragon Ball so much. Specifically, there's a reason I love like some of the movies more than others. But like there's a reason I love Dragon Ball and stuff. It is predictable. I know what's going to happen. But there is a certain amount of comfort in knowing that, right? And I love, yes, romance is predictable. Romance can be a bit formulaic. But I love it all the same because it's awesome. It's great. I think it's fun. There's a certain amount of comfort. There's also a certain amount of interest there for me, especially because a formula can also be, in a way, very the constraints that it might have can also lead to creativity. It depends on who you are. It could lead to creativity, and that some writers definitely thrive in those types of environments where there are rules that you should follow. And just because it can be formulaic, it doesn't mean you're going to be telling. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be telling the same story in a way. You technically are telling the same story, but in different ways. And each and there might even be different events. This is why I'm okay with tropes and everything like that, because even if you market your books with tropes, not every enemies to lovers romance is going to be the exact same events. It may be the same story, depending on what it is, but the characters are going to be different. The setting will be different. The essentially the meat of the story. The story may be the same, but like the meat of the story, the important parts of the story are going to be different, and that's kind of what matters in a way. Everything has, in a way, been told, right? I'm not sure there really are original ideas out there necessarily. I think there could be, but I also am of the belief that there's a lot that's already been told, or at least mostly everything has already been told. And the question is, what spin are you going to put on an old story? What's your spin on this trope? What's your spin on the story we already know? I think that's a big question. However, again, like I said, there could be that feeling of that rigidity kind of being an issue. One of the things, one of the videos I watched at some point, and I wish I could remember the exact title, but it is but the channel is called The Cozy Creative, and she made a video at some point talking about how cozy fantasy has become very rigid. At some point when it was finding its footing, it was a bit more like open and stuff like that, but now readers want, like, nothing bad can happen, essentially. And it has found its place, and now it is super rigid. And she talks about how that feels from what I remember. And it's really an interesting thing, I guess, because my favorite cozy story is Fruits Basket. And some terrible things happen in Fruits Basket. Like, the parents are horrible. But it still feels kind of like coming home. And it still has that cozy atmosphere in the story. It's a really interesting thing to consider. And I think it's something to consider in romance as well. So I've established that. The other thing to establish is the literary and commercial landscape of it. And I want to kind of bring it up because it's an important one. So literary fiction is kind of defined by character-driven stories. They explore a couple themes. They explore different themes in a really deep way, and also they are very much very much character-driven. It's great. They the pacing is generally a little bit slower than plot-driven stories, and again, they are known to be a bit more character-driven. While commercial fiction is more in the mainstream audience, literary fiction can be a bit more niche, but commercial fiction is made more for for the mainstream audience. It might be a bit more fast-paced. It's usually more plot-driven. Think thrillers, for example. If we're looking at it in like romantasy, for example, think Fourth Wing. It generally reaches more people. However, there's also the in-between. These are just kind of more binaries, but there's also the in-between. There will always be that commercial fiction that has literary elements and has a really good balance, and there will also be literary fiction that finds commercial success. I can think of, for example, My Dark Vanessa found commercial success, as well as Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. So those are good literary fiction titles that definitely found a good amount of commercial success. And so there's not, this is just a binary, but I think I think there's also the that in between that you have there. And I kind of wanted to bring this up because in a way romance falls into this too. And it's a bit interesting to look at, because one of the things that also got me to rethink this a bit was a video I saw, or at least part of a video that I saw from Elise. I will have to look up the exact video, but it was a book review. I think she was reviewing The Unhoneymooners by Christina Lauren, and based on what she described, the romance sounds like it would be terrible, and the guy treating her really badly, and the guy was terrible, generally speaking. And she brought up, can't we have a book that follows the romance beats, but she doesn't end up with the guy in the end? Like, what is the point of, like, does it really actually need a happily ever after? Does it actually, because, she ends up with such a terrible person. And like, is it actually necessary for her to end up with someone? And I think, while it might ruffle the feathers of romance readers, I think it's a valid question to ask. I asked myself that question a lot when I was during my romance journey. And, sometimes I still do, like when I read books like this. And I think the answer is yes and no. See, a really good example of a story that still has happily ever after, but follows the romance beats and could theoretically end didn't have to really end in a happily ever after, I think, would have been Beach Read. One of the things I found really interesting was another video I saw of someone saying that they don't think what Emily Henry writes is romance. They think that they write women's fiction. And it brought up an interesting, I guess, thing for me in that, but it had like the conventions and everything. So what was the difference, or what happened? And I think this is where that comes in for me. Because I think, again, that the answer to does romance actually need a happily ever after is yes and no. And it depends where you're writing it. So I think for commercial romance that is meant to just reach everybody and everything, is going to be a happily ever after. However, there is the other side. We are talking about literary fiction for a reason, guys. And that is the idea of literary romance. Because that is what I ended up Googling that day when I was trying to kind of figure out a bit more of what I was trying to figure out and research, the idea of following the romance beats, but maybe not ending in happily ever after. And literary romance can give people that kind of freedom. Usually when there is no happily ever after, yet it follows the romance beats, it's called a love story. But I think it's possible to also call it a romance, specifically a literary romance. So we know what literary fiction is. Literary romance essentially just combines the elements of literary fiction, which are that character-driven story and sometimes the very lyrical prose that come with it, because sometimes there's like a from what I read, it's also known for like literary fiction can also be known for like its prose. Though I've read a lot of accessible literary fiction, so I'm not taking the whole prose thing as seriously, but that's me. Anyway, it's also, I've read some commercial fiction with beautiful prose too, like Laini Taylor's books. Point being though, it has the literary fiction elements, such as like, the pacing and the character driven narratives and the romance beats. However, where it diverges from the conventions we are also used to related to romance is that literary romance can end in a happily ever after, but they can also end in a more of a bittersweet type of ending, or they don't actually have to end up together. You can essentially follow the romance beats, but they don't actually have to end up together. So depending on what you are writing and what you are reading, you could say that a romance does or does not need happily ever after, and depending on like how you want to classify it, even though it might be a bit more niche and it might reach less people, you could argue, the argument could be made here, which is the one I'm making, that romance doesn't need a happily ever after if you're writing something like literary romance. And you can make the argument that you can still even though it might ruffle the feathers of romance readers, you could argue the fact that you could actually call it a romance because it follows it still follows the romance beats. The only difference is that it will not end in a happily ever after, but it will have you could also, market it as literary fiction. Or at least, computer, stop. Sorry, you guys, my echo. You know what? I'm gonna just disconnect. Okay, sorry. It's giving me a reminder. Anywho, you could argue that if you market as both literary fiction and romance, and if you have the genre like literary romance, you could technically have both at the same time. And I think this is important because I think it allows for growth. One of the more interesting things I have seen, I think, online, when we look at romance and some of the discourse that surrounds it, is how readers and writers as well, but I spend a bit more time in the booktube space than in the author tube space and stuff like that. But I spend kind of a lot of time on, I spend time on both, but a lot of my content related to book space comes from booktube, and specifically how they hold on really tightly to what the romance genre is supposed to be. Nothing wrong with that. I think you have a right to your opinions, of course, as do I. But they hold on to these conventions, to these rules of romance, like really, really tightly. I don't know if I've seen it in other genres, so at least that I can't recall. So I'm focusing on romance specifically. I can't remember seeing that this way. And I noticed how tightly they hold on to these conventions, to these rules, and how adverse they are to someone calling a romance something that doesn't actually have a happily ever after. However, noting something like literary romance, I think, could add growth to the genre. I think this genre is awesome. I love the romance genre. I am not saying these things because I hate the romance genre. Like I said before, I really love it. My favorite genre is romantasy. I gushed a lot, and I probably will continue to gush about Sarah J. Maas books. And I reviewed quite favorably Jennifer L. Armentrout books. I did a lot of that. I love romance, and especially the good romances. I love them. You will see eventually when I review The Long Game how much I adore romance. And it has grown. There is something for everyone in romance. And one of the things, I don't remember if I said it in the review of The Kiss Quotient. I'll link it, if anything, below if you want to see it. But I don't know if I said it, but one of the things I feel for in romance, as a blind author that I am, I think that if I were looking to represent blind joy, or blindness in all its interesting, I guess, in all the things that it brings me, I think romance is the perfect genre to start, because romance, since it has a happily ever after / happy for now convention, again, at least in my opinion, for commercial romance, it has the possibility of having it so that, the blind character experiences joy instead of making it inspiration porn, as so much fiction actually does. I think romance is the perfect genre to take a disability like blindness and say, all right, I want to just write a character who is blind and they're finding love, and yeah, maybe I'll present some challenges, that relate to their blindness or whatever, but also they're happy by the end. I'm not going to write the inspiration porn of them, being an inspiration to people because of their blindness. Instead, I'm going to write a totally independent blind woman who recognizes that some people are being ableist, and also take she's still living, she still has her issues, but you know what? It's not meant to inspire you. I can take it and I can say, all right, she's gonna take O&M classes, but I'm not gonna tell you what the hell O&M is. By the way, for those who don't know, it's orientation and mobility. I'm not gonna explain what that is in my fiction book. You can research that. I don't have to do that. I think romance is the perfect place for that. It has all this joy and all this hope, and that is what I love about romance. But at the same time, I think that there is room for romance that doesn't for the romance books that don't necessarily have all this joy, all this excitement. I think there is room for something like literary romance, where the ending where the person might fall in love, but at the end of the day, might decide to end it for whatever reason. And I think there's room for that. And I think we as readers and as writers should allow for that growth. One of my fears when it comes to genre conventions is that rigidity. I fear that if we make these genres so rigid, especially the romance genre, if we make it so rigid, we will essentially forget as writers and everything. I fear that we will just stay there and we're not we won't push ourselves to something else. One of the best parts about studying writing for me in high school and in college, but especially high school, those first 2 years of creative writing, it was the different forms of writing I took. My freshman year was regular fiction, and we were writing short stories. Then we did a poetry unit, and then by the end I also did a playwriting unit. Sophomore year, we did again short stories, but after that we also did a sci-fi unit. Then we did a graphic novel unit, and we learned how to write like graphic novel scripts. That was so much fun. And we did a screenwriting unit right after, which I actually thought would be kind of difficult for me because of the visuals. I also thought the same for playwriting, but it turned out I was able to do it, and it was so much fun. And some of the stuff I learned, I still use today. The way I describe things, sometimes I use the stuff I learned from specifically from screenwriting, because it was easier. You have to describe some things. Also, I listen to audio description, and audio description heavily forms the way that I describe things in the way that I choose to do that, because it's a bit simpler, and I've kind of gotten comfortable with that. Also, anime influences how I write, and a lot of the different stuff I watch on TV influences the things I write, and it influences and makes me excited to write. It also, makes me really, it makes it so that I feel comfortable. The disciplines I took, or the forms of writing I took in high school and in college, and the stuff I watch now make me really comfortable in experimenting. When you, for example, say you watch something in anime, it's like, that's probably not going to work in a book. Okay, I'm going to try it anyway. And if it fails, it fails. But I tried. And that's what makes it fun. And that's what makes writing fun. The fact that there are no rules and there are technically there's no right way to write is what makes writing fun. And I fear that this kind of rigidity, this like almost like clutching your pearls kind of attitude to, no, romance needs a happily ever after and anything else is not a romance. I fear it will make it so that the growth in romance is stunted in a way, and it doesn't grow past some certain things, which is why I ask as a writer that we allow for other forms of romance. We already are allowing for abuse romance, which I don't consider romance. It should probably be more like horror, but we're already allowing for abuse romance, and we are calling it dark romance. But the little research I did on dark romance suggests that things like Haunting Adeline don't really fit dark romance. It's more like, that's more like abuse type romance. So that's why I'm calling it abuse romance. We're already allowing abuse romance. What is wrong with having someone market their book as a romance, even if it doesn't end in happily ever after? Perhaps it is a literary romance, because it's a big character exploration and it has those things. What is wrong with actually ending a romance in a more bitter or sweet, or just they're not together and they had a good time? What is wrong with allowing that type of story into the romance genre? I really want an answer, because the answer, because romance needs a happily ever after or happy for now, doesn't cut it. It's not enough. I want more than that for this genre that I love so much. I want more than that. And I think allowing other forms of romance make it so that we can do that. So that we can hopefully do that, you know? One other thing to say is that, again, I love the genre, and I want to see where it continues to go in the next couple of years. And I feel like if we add other forms of romance, things like literary romance and stuff like that, for example, if we allow more freedoms in the genre, we can have a different type of romance for everybody. Maybe people don't just want to read the usual commercial romance, which again, that kind of predictable romance, which again is not bad, but maybe people are interested in romance that explores more of the messier side, as well as just the characters a bit more. I actually would argue that some of the romances I read that are technically commercial, things like The Long Game by Elena Armas, could be considered literary rom-coms, because they have literary elements to them. And I think that makes it so that we can accept more types of romance in this beautiful genre, and make a beautiful and gorgeous tapestry of romance books, and we have more readers, and we give more choice. And I think that is the point of any that is the one thing I think we love about romance, as well about at least one of the things I love about romance is the types of romance that I can find. And I think if we add more, well, we have more romance to choose from, and that's exciting. Which is why I think, in a way, if we clutch our pearls like this, we don't allow the genre to grow, and we just make it more rigid by doing that. And I think it's not fun without that. I think it's not fun. So does romance need a happily ever after? I'd say no. I think romance needs a happily ever after when it's commercial, but when it's literary romance, you have more freedom. It's actually one of the things I love about writing in the literary fiction genre. It is the freedom of the lack of conventions, because it allows for experimental writing. Like, again, because I watch anime, sometimes I want to experiment with a couple of interesting things that they did. And I do. And again, if it fails, it fails, but I tried and it was fun. And that's what makes writing fun for me. And hey, technically speaking, anime is adapted from light novels and manga. That doesn't mean some of the stuff can't be adapted into, actual novels, which is why I love learning about other writing conventions, because of course there's always something else, and it's something more interesting. The other thing, but again, like I said, I have freedom to do that in literary fiction, but commercial fiction doesn't always give that. It's a bit more, depending on the genre, it's a bit more rigid and formulaic, but I can do that. And I kind of want to see, again, if we embrace literary romance, what we're going to have. Are we going to have literary cozy romance, literary cozy romantasy, just regular literary romantasy? Are we going to have literary rom-coms? I think there's room for all of it here. And I think we should, allow it to be there. So yes, I think happily ever after is dependent on what it is. And if we're already allowing things like abuse romance, and you know that in the dark romance realm, some people take it very far. Very far. I'm sure you've heard of a lot of it. What prevents us from allowing something like literary romance? And another thing to say is that is messaging. So I do not believe that that writers should necessarily send a message with any of the stories that they write. I don't think that's necessary. I don't think you need to give people a message by the end, or that your story should do that. I think you should be aware of the message you're sending, but I do not think it is a necessary thing to have a message on each of your stories. But let's say you do want to send a message, and you end up writing an asshole protagonist like the one in this book. And by the end, you're like, she probably shouldn't be with this man. But also, the romance genre forces me to write in a happily ever after, if you want to stay in the romance genre, of course. you if you want to stay in the romance genre, you don't want to just call it a love story. And it's like, what if you decide you don't want her to end up with this man, because she realizes by the end that she deserves better, and that she should have one who is at the very least going to, comfort her when she comes to him, because she is looking for that, for whatever reason. What if you decide, yes, they fell in love, and she realizes, I lived that high school crush I wanted, but he really hurt me, and I don't think it's fair for me to continue to actually pursue a relationship with this man. I think literary romance would give that freedom. But if we, continue to clutch our pearls and we want to write romance, I think it's not, it doesn't make it as interesting. And calling it a love story, just for me, it doesn't work as much anymore. And I think we should have more options. So those are my thoughts. What do you think? Let me know. I think I dropped a lot on you, and I think that the way I think the way I argued this, I think I gave nuance, but I am curious to know what you have to say about this. Because I know that there are people that have argued that yes, romance is happily ever after, but I think it's a lot more gray than that black and white. I think it's important that we look at the interesting parts of it. And as a writer, I like these options. I like how fun it would be for me to decide when I write a romance, whether I want it to end in happily ever after. And as of now, the romance that I'm writing, or that I'm still editing, is, I classify it as a literary romantasy. And I think it's I get the fact that I get to decide that, even though I know what my ending is going to look like. The fact that I have the option to decide how I get to end it gives so much freedom to me, and tells me that yes, I can still market it as a romance, and that is what I will do. I will market it as a romance, but also tell you something else. But it's still, it gives me freedom though to decide other romances, whether I want them to end the way that I want this one to end. And that for me is the best part of writing. So yeah, those are my thoughts. That is that is the point of this. So I'm going to end it here. Don't forget to, I'm not going to give you any updates because there's not a lot. I've actually just been really busy with work that I am doing. I have a position serving, I have a position and stuff. Sorry, I'm misspeaking, but I have a position, and I have a schedule now that I kind of like a work schedule thing, and I'm excited to see where things go. And I just have been really busy, so hopefully I would like to sit down and edit more videos and make sure that you guys get at least once a month. I would like once a week, but if I can't do that, maybe once a month. I don't know. We will see. I was hoping to do weekly, but that may not always be the case. But those are my thoughts though. I'm going to end it here. I've also been writing still and going that way. But I'm going to end it here. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button and comment and turn on notifications so you're aware when I post videos. If you would like to see my writing, I have pieces on my blog linked in the description. I also have books out, so if you want to kind of see what my writing looks like and you want to support the channel, you can buy the books that I have. I have my debut being a literary fantasy, and I also have a poetry collection out. You can also buy them direct. You can buy them from the different stores, including Amazon now, as well as my bookshop on Ko-fi. You can also just do a one-time donation if you would like to support me that way. And like I mentioned in the intro, I do have a Substack now as well, where I post pieces. It's very similar to my blog, but if you are looking for like a early access to stuff, Substack would be the place to go. And with that, thank you so much for giving me your time today. I know that this video is very long, but I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for giving me your time today, and until next time, consume stories. Bye!